Well, welcome everyone. I'm Abigail Byman, and I'm on the board of the ACLU of Pennsylvania and also on the board of the Northeast Pennsylvania chapter of the ACLU. When we held a voting rights forum here 4 years ago, there were more panelists than audience. We have improved, not as much as I'd like, but we have improved greatly since then, and one of the reasons is the voter ID law. Before I introduce the panelists, let me just read to you the Pennsylvania Constitution's one-sentence provision on voting rights. Elections shall be free and equal, and no power, civil or military, shall at any time interfere to prevent the free exercise of the right of suffrage. This is at the heart of what we're talking about today. Okay, introductions. Sitting in one of the middle seats in the table is Sara Mullen. She's the Associate Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Pennsylvania. She's in charge of community organizing, public education, and communication for the state affiliate. She's been an indispensable part of the ACLU's efforts to oppose the implementation of this law. Sara will talk about the law and the ACLU's efforts in conjunction with other individuals and organizations on the public education and litigation fronts. You can tell which organization I belong to. That's way longer than any other introduction. I have no apologies. Okay, our next speaker will be Marion Medalis, who's the director of the Lackawanna County Board of Elections and has had that job for a while. After her, Roberta Winters, who's the vice president for issues and action of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. She comes to us from Philly, and she's been on the state board of that organization for 4 years. At the end of the table is Ron Felton, who is the president of the Wilkes-Barre chapter of the NAACP, which basically serves as the Northeast Pennsylvania chapter, and he's been the president for a lot of years. It says exactly on the website, in case you're interested. Okay. Keith Williams, who's right next to me, is the Director of Advocacy for the Northeast Pennsylvania Center for Independent Living. He's also a Vice President of the ACLU's Northeast Pennsylvania chapter. Michael Hanley is the Executive Director of the United Neighborhood Centers. And finally, not on the panel, but indispensable to this, is Andrea Mullen, who is president of the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County and our moderator.
Thank you, Abby. Thanks, Abby, and thank you all for joining us here this evening. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of both Lackawanna County and Pennsylvania, and also the University of Scranton, I want to welcome you here to our campus this evening. The League, our local league, could not do the work that we do without the partnership with the University of Scranton and their support and allowing us to use the beautiful facilities here, so we truly appreciate that. I also want to extend our thanks and appreciation to ECTV. They're here tonight taping, and this program will be available through the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County website. It's lwvlackawanna.org. So tell your friends. If they are not here this evening, they're going to miss a great discussion on a really important issue, and they can catch it on the web as well. This evening's program, we're going to allow time for each one of our speakers to talk about what their organization does and the impact of the law, the new law that we're implementing here, and then we'll move on to Q&A from the audience. So please hold your questions until the speakers are finished, and then we've got a microphone and we'll move on through that. Our first speaker this evening, Sara Mullen from the ACLU. Sara, it's all to you.
Hi, thank you so much. I can tell I'm not in Philly anymore. We would never have a program start on time, so I'm very impressed. First, I wanted to say I'm a bit of a voter ID dork, so if you want to get into the nitty-gritty afterwards, I'm happy to talk to you about what specific IDs work, all those kind of questions, so we can do that. I, of course, do hope eventually that my knowledge will become useless because the law will be overturned. A girl can dream. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the history of our lawsuit. We, along with the Philadelphia, or the Public Interest Law Center of Philadelphia, Advancement Project, and Arnold and Porter, filed a lawsuit challenging the voter ID law. So this was passed back in the spring of this year, and the alleged reason was all the voter fraud going on in Pennsylvania. You may have heard about right before the trial that the state actually stipulated to the fact that they know of no voter fraud in Pennsylvania, they know of no voter fraud in other states. This is in-person voter fraud, I should be clear. And they didn't expect, if the voter ID law didn't go into effect in November, they did not anticipate there would be any in-person voter fraud. So that's the framework. We and a lot of groups here at the table fought against this bill when it was proposed in the legislature for a few simple reasons. One, it's just undemocratic. It puts up unnecessary barriers to voting. We should be encouraging people to vote. It's hard enough to get people to vote. We really don't need to have people take extra trips to PennDOT, or impossible. Some people, it was impossible to get the ID. We don't want to put those kind of barriers up for our citizens when trying to participate in our democracy. And this is a surprise to many people. I have to admit, I was surprised before I started doing this work to realize there are a lot of people that function in the society without government-issued ID. It could be, the rates vary from what we think, but somewhere around 9% of people don't have ID. And I've met many of these people. And a significant number of them, it's not that they haven't tried to get ID. There are just, especially since September 11th, there have been a lot of security issues around getting a PennDOT ID, so you have to have a birth certificate. A number of our clients were born to midwives in the South, and there were some born in Philadelphia, and they were never issued birth certificates. So these kind of issues affect the elderly. And in fact, ID laws affect certain populations much more than others. We had a professional survey done for our lawsuit, and Latinos lack ID at a much higher rate than other groups. Women actually lack ID at a much higher rate, and the very poor lack IDs. And the very young, 18 to 35, also lack IDs at high rates. So there are people that are really significantly impacted by this kind of a law. So as I said, in May, we filed a lawsuit with a number of individual plaintiffs who had tried but were unable to get ID, or people, some of them because of the birth certificate issue. Some of them we had one actually, I think he was a witness and not a client, but he has autism. He tried to go to PennDOT, and it was just too overwhelming for him, and he just couldn't handle it. So we also have a number of older folks who going to PennDOT is very difficult. They can, their polling place is right in their community or right in their building even, so they don't have a problem going. They're not eligible to vote absentee by absentee. Pennsylvania has a very strict absentee voting rules, so you have to either be ill, have a disability, or be out of town, out of your polling place. So it's not like everyone could just take the option of voting absentee. So as I said, May, we filed the lawsuit. We had a 7-day trial back in July and early August before Judge Simpson in Harrisburg. We thought we put on a really great case. As I said, we had all these plaintiffs. I should mention some of the other plaintiffs. We had organizational plaintiffs, 2 of whom are at this table. The League of Women Voters and the NAACP were our organizational plaintiffs, along with the Homeless Advocacy Project. And we had some great testimony. We were very pleased with how the trial went, and we're very disappointed when Judge Simpson found that voting is not a fundamental right. That might come as a surprise to some of you. And he said that no one was at risk of being disenfranchised. He didn't believe our expert testimony about how many people didn't have IDs. Said those people who didn't have IDs could either easily get them or they could vote absentee. So we were very disappointed by this ruling. There was an oral argument last week in Philadelphia before the state Supreme Court. And we were actually yesterday got the decision. So it wasn't a decision anyone was expecting. I have to say, some of us who write press releases in advance of decisions kind of tend to write a yay or nay, we won, we lost. Well, those kind of went out the window with this decision. The lawyers confirmed this was a very unusual decision. So 4-2, they sent this back down to Judge Simpson. They vacated his ruling. And it really was a unanimous decision in the sense that none of them liked Judge Simpson's ruling, because the 2 who didn't vote for this said that the court immediately should have issued the injunction. So they were not happy. And in fact, I just have to read one of the dissenting judges, because I think it's a really strong thing. By remanding to the Commonwealth Court at this late date and at this most critical civic moment, in my view, this court abdicates its duty to emphatically decide a legal controversy vitally important to the citizens of this Commonwealth. The eyes of the nation are upon us, and this court has chosen to punt rather than to act. I will have no part of it. So it was fun to read the dissenting opinions. So what this means is the justices were not convinced that there will not be anyone disenfranchised. They shifted the burden of proof to the state to prove that there won't be any voters who will be disenfranchised by this law. I think that's a pretty high burden. The numbers vary for how many people lack ID in Pennsylvania. The lowest number I've seen by anyone is from Secretary Carol Achel. That was around 90,000 people. So far, they've distributed a little bit more than 9,000 voter IDs. So you can do the math and realize, even with that lowest number, that there's a significant number of people who won't be able to vote. Of course, we think it's much higher, somewhere in the range of 500,000 people. And the problem is, what we can't prove in court is that there'll be people who won't know about the law. By definition, you find them, they don't know about the law. They know about the law, so that's one issue. The other issue is getting to PennDOT is still a burden for people. I myself took a 99-year-old woman on Friday to PennDOT, and God bless her, I was really impressed. She really wants to vote, and she's arthritic. She broke her hip a few years ago. She used a walker, but we took a couple hours and went to PennDOT, and she came out of there with her voter ID. So I was very moved by that. I have to admit that someone wants to vote that much. They go through that pain and that time to do that, but she shouldn't have to. So as I said, the burden is now shifted to the state to show that no one will be disenfranchised. This goes back to Judge Simpson, and today we actually found out the trial for this. Yes, it all goes back again. The trial about this goes on next Tuesday, 10 a.m. before Judge Simpson in Harrisburg. There won't be any testimony on Wednesday because of Yom Kippur, and then the trial will finish on that Thursday. The justices ordered that the Judge Simpson issue a ruling by October 2nd. Then that decision can be appealed by the loser in that and go back to the state Supreme Court. I know many of us have very serious concerns about how long this is dragged out. I mean, I think that we think we can make our case that there will be people who will be disenfranchised. We already know if people have been turned down for the Department of State ID. For those who don't know, this is the ID of last resort. So supposedly anyone can get this, except for a number of people who've been rejected for it. There are still requirements for that: 2 proofs of residency, your social security number. And as I said, you still have to get to PennDOT, but we do have people who've been rejected for that as well. So that's where the law stands right now. I did want to mention, because I know a lot of people think of the ACLU as a legal organization, that we've actually been very active on the organizing front as well to fight this law, because we have faith in the courts, but we don't want to put all our eggs in that basket. So since the law was passed, we've mounted a very aggressive public education campaign to try to educate voters about the law. We have distributed about 80,000 of our Know Your Rights cards about voter ID and what IDs are acceptable. On the back, it has how to get the IDs. We also have a new web widget. You can use it on your mobile phone or on your computer at aclupa.org/checkmyid. And this just leads people through a series of questions to find out if you have the right ID for voting. It's helpful for people who are doing advocacy work as well, because it is a complicated law and it is one of the most restrictive voter ID laws in the country. So I don't want to take too much time, so thank you.
All right, thank you, Sara. And for those of you who are here this evening, I think you have a supply of those cards with you, so feel free to pick one up in the lobby on your way out. And for those of you who are watching at home, I'm sure you can get it on the ACLU website, and your web address is?
aclupa.org.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much for that summary of what's been going on. Our next speaker, she had a very brief introduction, but I'm going to take moderator's privilege here, speaker's privilege, and just go on a little bit longer than that. Marion Medalis is the Director of Voter, is it Education or Services, Marion?
Department of Elections.
Okay, I don't get her title right, but I know her well. Marion, we're very fortunate in Lackawanna County because Marion has been in that office for many years. I'm not quite sure if it's 30 or
30 plus.
30-plus years. So Marion has seen the use of lever machines. How many of us here know the lever machines? Marion also was part of the implementation team of the changes after the passage of the Help America Vote Act in 2002, including Lackawanna County's failed attempt at an electronic voting machine. So she had to implement the use of an electronic voting machine and then implement the decommissioning of an electronic voting machine. We're now voting on paper ballots with a scan system so they can be counted and then recounted if necessary by hand. So we have what we believe is a very good system of voting in Lackawanna County. But Marion has seen it all under many different county commissioners. And one of the things that is certainly an issue in Pennsylvania is that we have a law that's been passed by the state, and we have 67 counties in Pennsylvania, and the implementation of the law is up to the individual counties. So the voter, how the polls work, where the polls are located, the management of the machines, all of that falls to the individual counties. So on top of what normally happens during an election season, and on top of what normally happens during a presidential election season, Marion now has the daunting task of making sure that everyone is trained and that we properly implement this law if it is not overturned. So Marion, I hope that I haven't stolen your thunder, but I'm going to turn it over to you. Marion Medalis.
Thank you, Andrea. As everyone is aware, and what we were just told, the Commonwealth Court is going to be handing a decision down on October 2nd regarding the implementation of the voter ID law. Right now, we are moving forward as if the law remains the same. And what this means is all voters that will be voting at the polling place will need to show a form of photo ID before casting their votes. Some of the acceptable forms of photo ID are photos issued by the U.S. federal government or Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, including the Pennsylvania Department of State ID for voting purposes, a Pennsylvania driver's license or non-driver's license photo ID, a U.S. passport, a U.S. military ID, an employee ID issued by federal, county, or municipal government, photo IDs from an accredited public or private college or university, photo IDs issued by a Pennsylvania care facility, including long-term facilities, assisted living residences, or personal care homes. A lot of the calls that we're getting in our office are the names may not match what's on their driver's license as opposed to what's on their voter registration records. The law says that the names have to substantially conform. So what this means is, let's say on your driver's license, on your driver's license you have Margaret Smith, but on your voter registration records you may be listed as Peggy Smith. Obviously the name conforms. A lot of other calls we're getting, some have a middle initial or a middle name, and we don't have it on our records. Again, we're going to train our poll workers. You have to use a little bit common sense with some of the issues that may arise at the precincts when the photo ID are presented to them. And always, poll workers could always call our office on election day if they have any questions or concerns about a specific ID that's being shown. Now, what happens if a voter doesn't present an acceptable form of photo ID? If a voter doesn't present an acceptable form of photo ID at the polling place, the voter must be given the opportunity to cast a provisional ballot. Now, in order for this provisional ballot to count, the voter must, within 6 days after the day of the election, provide our office with a copy of the acceptable form of photo ID. Now, they could do this either mail, email, fax, or in person. They also need to sign an affirmation that the voter was the same person who cast the provisional ballot. Now, many voters may think that going to a polling place, they don't want to show a photo ID to try to spite themselves or someone else. But yes, you will be given the opportunity to cast a provisional ballot, but again, they have to remember, in order for that ballot to count, we do need a copy of the acceptable form of the photo ID. I know a lot of other questions and concerns we're getting is the getting to PennDOT. Now, our PennDOT office is located in Dunmore in the Keystone Industrial Park. And in order to go to the PennDOT Center, there's only certain days of operation to get the photo ID. And you have to go by the driver's license center times. And those hours of operation are Wednesday from 12 to 7:45 and Friday and Saturday from 8:30 to 4:15. I know some people have gone up to PennDOT on different days, and obviously they were turned away. So we are trying to get this message out also, that please try to go on those specific days and times. We are going to start educating our poll workers on October 13th. We have classes already scheduled for 2 Saturdays in October, and also some evening classes. Now, of course, depending on, what happens with the photo ID law, will depend on, obviously, our training. But right now, we do need to move forward with the intent that the law is standing as it is. Thank you.
Marion, I have just a couple questions for you. There are some important dates that are coming up pertaining to registering to vote and asking for an absentee ballot. Can you let everybody know what those dates are?
Sure. The last day to register for the upcoming election is October 9th, and just keep in mind, if an application is mailed, it has to be postmarked by October 9th. You could drop off the forms at our office. We're located at 2400 Stafford Avenue, or you could also drop them off at the Gateway Center, which is at 135 Jefferson Avenue. The last day to apply for an absentee ballot is October 30th.
Marion, if someone didn't have the photo ID and they wanted to register to vote, they needed to register to vote, can they register by October 9th, even if they haven't gotten to PennDOT yet, to get their photo ID?
Yes.
So the most important date to remember next is if you're not already registered to vote, or if you need to make a change in your name on your registration,
Yes.
You need to get that postmarked or delivered by October 9th, right?
That's correct.
And then the photo ID up until Election Day. You have up until Election Day, but really important to get that registration taken care of,
Yes.
right? And your office, which was on Jefferson Avenue for a very long time, moved a couple years ago, and I think a lot of people really aren't familiar with where you are right now. So where's your location?
We're located off Interstate 81. You would take the Davis Street exit, make a right onto Stafford Avenue. We're a half a mile past the Scranton Post Office. On the left side, it's the Stafford Avenue Business Park. There's plenty of parking. You don't have to worry about meters, and just pull right up to the front door.
And your office, the phone numbers and everything are on the Lackawanna County website, right?
Yes.
And that's lackawannacounty.org, if I'm not mistaken, so you can
correct.
find it there. One of the other questions that I have pertains to absentee ballot forms, and my husband actually ran into this. He picked up some absentee ballot forms at the local state store recently. I'm not saying what my husband was doing at the state store, okay? For those of you who know him, you know what he was doing there. But the form that he picked up at the time, and this was a couple of weeks ago, was actually the old form that did not have the right, it wasn't the new form that required the voter ID. So now if someone picked that form up from any location, wherever it might have been, and they mail it in, it also had the old address. It had the 135 Jefferson Avenue address. So can you speak to what would happen to that form? Would it get delivered to you, and what would you do with it?
Yes, we still get mail delivered to our old address, so we pick up on a daily basis, so that's not an issue. And in terms if any voters do pick up the old applications, we either contact them by phone or letter to get their driver's license number or a non-photo number or the last 4 digits of their social, which is the requirement if you're applying for an absentee ballot.
And if somebody had picked up an old voter registration form somewhere and mailed that in, the same process would apply?
We definitely still get them.
Okay, terrific. One other point of information, members of the League of Women Voters met with folks from COLTS, our County of Lackawanna Transit System, last week I think it was, talking about the issue, what Marion had said, and what Sara as well, about the difficulty of getting to PennDOT. I mean, that can be a problem for people. For us in Lackawanna County, it's up in the Dunmore Industrial Park. If you don't have a car, it can be difficult for you to get there. The Jessup line of the COLTS bus system does take you up there, and if you tell the bus driver that you want to go to the photo ID center for the state police, you can, or the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, it's not state police. They will take you over there as well. If you need a transfer, you can buy a one-day pass on the bus. So for the elderly, of course, in Lackawanna County, elderly don't pay to ride the bus. But if you're disabled, there's a discount for that. If you're not elderly or disabled and you need to get up there, you can buy a one-day pass if you need to make transfers to get there, and it would cost $3.50 for the day. If you're not on any of the bus lines and you still need transportation to get there, if you get in touch with COLTS, they will talk to you about some options for other types of transportation. There may be a cost for it, but they are mandated by the Department of Transportation to provide whatever they can in the way of transportation to get people to get their photo ID. So that's something that you want to take a look at. If you need information on that, the link for that is on the League's website, and again, it's lwvlackawanna.org. So with that, we'll move on to our next speaker. Roberta Winters is the Vice President for Issues and Action at the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, and is an expert on this issue as well as on Marcellus Shale. So Roberta, it's all yours.
Thank you, Andrea. It's a pleasure to be back in Scranton. I was here several months ago when we were talking about Marcellus Shale, and I want to share a few minutes with you about what the League is and what the League does. So you know, the League of Women Voters is really a misnomer. We are open to both men and women of ages 18 and above. So you might say, well, why don't you change your name? Well, the League is very proud of its long history, and I have the button on here that says Votes for Women. That's where we started, actually 6 months before the ratification of the 19th Amendment. The League of Women Voters was formed. And why were we formed? Well, at the time, people didn't believe women were smart enough to vote. So we took it upon ourselves as an organization to inform women about registering, about the voting process, about how elections work, how you could run for office, and how our government works as a whole. Now, the League had grand plans. We thought this was going to be done in 5 years. Guess what? We're still fighting. Now, we still have a three-pronged mission. First, our job is to encourage informed and active participation in government. In other words, we want you to care about what's happening in your government. Second, we want to increase the understanding that you all have about major policies issues in this country, whether it's immigration, health care, voter ID. So we want you not only to care, but also to know what the issues are. And third, we want to try to influence public policy through education and advocacy. So in other words, to care, to know, and then finally to act, do something about it. The League is political. We care about the process, but we are nonpartisan. We do not support or endorse candidates. Now, I brought with me my plant today because unlike some organizations you may hear about, the League of Women Voters is a grassroots organization. So if you look below, you will find the local leagues. That's where the real strength and source of the League comes from. Actually, We start at the local level with study and consensus. If you can think about it, in Indiana County, and those of you who know geography know that's way out in the western part of the state. In 2008, they had league members concerned about what they saw with natural gas drilling operations in their area. They started a study. That study went to the state level. We studied it. We formed a position. From that position, we went to the national organization in 2010, passed a resolution about safe drilling and mining. So this is where it starts, at the local level, then to the state, and then to the national level. So we study. And those people who've ever been involved in a league know that we study issues. It's a slow, thorough process, but we usually don't make very many mistakes. We believe that to act without a study is fatal. But further, to study and then not act is futile. So we try to do both. We are a watchdog. You may see us at public meetings, taking notes. We want to make sure things are transparent. People have the right to know. And we want to make sure that we're watching what's happening. Of course, if you can see in front of me, you will see a huge duck. And that duck has a shirt on it. And the shirt says, "They can't hear you unless you vote." Voter services has been a major role of the League of Women Voters for decades. We have local government directories. You probably have some in Lackawanna County. They tell you things like who your elected officials are, where your polling places are, what those critical dates are all about. This has been going on for decades. This is not just because of voter ID. We have programs about how to run for office. We have election information. You may be familiar with Smart Voter. It's a website where it has all the nonpartisan information about candidates, who they are, what their positions are. We also have provided sometimes voters' guides in local newspapers. You may be familiar with those as well. We've also run candidates forums. I'm sure Andrea's familiar with moderating some of those as well, where local and state elected officials have the opportunity to share with those who are running for the same office, to express their positions and answer questions from you, the public. We also sometimes have televised candidates forums. We're expecting to have one in Harrisburg on public television with Senator Casey, who's an incumbent, and his candidate who's running against him, Mr. Smith, hopefully on October 11th. The League is known as being a respected convener. Sometimes we moderate things where no one else would want to go, but we're there. We are concerned about the process of voting and elections, and this did not just start with voter ID. The League was involved at a great degree of time and effort in the redistricting process. And those of you who are familiar with that know that your vote and how it counts is based on redistricting. And because of historical problems we've had with both parties in terms of trying to maintain the incumbency of those currently in office, lines are gerrymandered and municipalities are divided. Thanks to the work of Amanda Holt and many of the League members who've supported those efforts, we are still now in Supreme Court to determine whether the state's latest plan will be thrown out or not. We're also concerned with things like national popular vote. So instead of using the Electoral College, we have a position at the national level that would support things like a national popular vote, where the person who won the popular vote would actually become the president. It's not a simple process, but we think it may be easier than a constitutional amendment. What are we doing now? What are we doing? Well, as always, the League's involved in voter registration. You probably see League people standing outside grocery stores, at farmers markets, at library events, local fairs. However, we do also educate. But the whole voter ID thing has added a whole new dimension to the work of the League of Women Voters. Maybe some of you have seen this brochure. It's sort of like the ACLU one. It says, "What's in your wallet? Do you have what you need to vote?" We have seen that, as with most legislation with the voter ID, the devil is in the details. We're looking at licenses. We're looking at passports. We're looking at all different kinds of challenges that are coming to us, because it seems like every time we spend a lot of money printing something out, the Department of State changes the rules. So that's made it very challenging, and I think they've changed the rules just this week. So anything that I tell you today, you may know will probably be different tomorrow. The issue is that we're finding the hardest thing to do, and we are working in coalition with many of our partners here, is to get the word out so everyone knows what's needed, and we can work to support and help them get what is needed. I was at the American Legion Convention about a month ago, and one of the big concerns that I found there is many of the veterans assume because they have a veterans access card with their picture that they can use that for a photo ID. They cannot. It does not have an expiration date. They are not active military personnel. What they thought would work will not work. So it's very important that they know, just because it's issued by a government agency, it may not be what is needed. I was a school teacher for many years. You heard Sara from the ACLU say that you could use, or it wasn't Sara, it was Maria, said that you could have an ID with a picture from a government, national, state, or local municipality. Well, that works fine, except if you're a school teacher. They don't recognize IDs issued by the local school districts. So if you're an employee there, that's a problem, if that's all you have. I did bring a copy of what's expected if you are in a retirement home or independent living facility. It's a very simple ID. They can run them off on their computers. However, we found that some institutions and agencies don't want to do this. They don't think it's cost effective. All they need is the name of the nursing care facility, perhaps, the person's name, photo, and an expiration date. So if you know anyone who's in a nursing home, a care facility, retirement community, encourage them to ask. Make sure they provide this for everyone. The League of Women Voters also finds that our advocacy ends with the court system. And thanks to the ACLU and our other partners who are providing the legal counsel, we are one of the organizational plaintiffs involved in this decision. As a league, you probably know that we speak with one voice. And so I will say that the league believes it was a very interesting decision. If you would like to have the league's opinion on it, you may contact our president, Olivia Thorne. Her number is 610-566-5474. Also, all of you should have on or near you a card that looks like this. It says join the League of Women Voters. All of our organizations would like you to join us, but at the back are some critical numbers. One is the 1-866-OUR-VOTE. That's the Pennsylvania Voters Coalition. And even though it's located in southeastern Pennsylvania for the most part, we do have access to things that will help everybody throughout the state. The State Department website, www.votespa.com. And I've heard people say in Philadelphia, and I think it's smart, think Vote Spa PA. Then you'll get the right website, okay? It's not really a spa, but it's Vote Spa PA. And finally, our guide for nonpartisan information about the candidates, smartvoter.org. I would thank you and hope you will continue to be a voice for citizens as we are and a force for change so we can make it work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Roberta. One other point I'd like to make pertaining to photo ID cards is that one of the authorized methods, one of the authorized types of ID is an ID with an expiration date that's been issued by an accredited college or university. The University of Scranton, of course, we're on the campus of the University of Scranton right now, does not normally print an expiration date on our ID cards. However, they have made arrangements through Student Affairs? And the network services. And network services. So if you're someone who is a member of the University of Scranton community and you need a photo ID to vote, you can get in touch with our help desk here on campus, and they can issue you a sticker, because that's actually valid by state law, is to put a sticker on your university ID card, and that's a valid mechanism to use for photo ID. So,
for employees as well as students that in higher education.
So Jean Harris, our director or our chairman of our political science department here at the university has said that it's not just for students, it's for employees as well, so faculty and staff as well as students. So moving on, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Ron Felton from he's the president of the Luzerne County NAACP. Ron, it's yours.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm also the political action chair for the Pennsylvania State Conference of NAACP branches. The NAACP, from its very inception, realized the importance of the vote, and we, as the League of Women Voters, have always made voter registration a critical part of our ongoing advocacy work. Too many of our leaders have died to try and register people to vote, and that shows you basically the importance of your vote, that people are willing to kill people for simply registering people to vote. And if you look at this voter ID law is nothing but organized chaos. If you just listen to what Marion said about the training that they're going to have to conduct so that their people, when the people come to the polls, are going to have to be able to look into different ways that people's names might be presented. So you're putting the burden, some more burden on the people at the polls. Now, we're living in this high technology area. Why is this? And you're hearing all these different numbers. We hear 90,000. You hear almost 750,000 to 1.5 million. I mean, something is wrong with this picture here. I mean, we send our sons, daughters, mothers, and fathers, family members overseas to fight and to try and promote the very democracy that we're denying our own citizens right here in the state of Pennsylvania, right here in this country. You know, we went to a rally down in Harrisburg before the Common Court had been filled up going down to Harrisburg. And you know what else? You see the commercial on TV about the new voter ID that they're presenting at PennDOT? That they make the people who are impacted by this law, it's like they've done something wrong. They making them like the victim is like a criminal of some sort, like they're unpatriotic or something, the fact that they don't have this ID. And initially, I'll be honest with you, when it first came out, my wife and I said, well, who doesn't have an ID? You know, because I got a driver's license. She has a driver's license. But there's obviously people who are functioning in our society and are able to do so without having a photo ID. Now, I also work for Social Security, so I do know some of the problems that people face. They go to get a driver's license, and they need a Social Security card, but they don't have an ID when they come to get the Social Security card. So now what do? So they got to jump through all these hoops to try to get this information. Now, what if you are a person that wasn't born in Pennsylvania, that you were born out of state? Now you're going to have to send to your home state to get your birth certificate. It was said earlier, I was born by a midwife. Okay, I do have a photocopy of a birth certificate, but it doesn't have a raised seal or nothing like that. But I'm the product of a midwife that was born in the home. Okay, so this is a challenge, and I'm very frustrated. This is an assault on democracy. This is an assault on democracy. You have Florida, the League of Women Voters, has suspended their voter registration efforts in Florida because they passed a law that said if you didn't turn the registrations in within 48 hours, you were going to be fined $50 for everyone that was late, up to $10,000 and possibly imprisonment. Now, since then, that law has been overturned. Texas won't take a student ID, but they'll take a hunting ID. Okay, that law was overturned. Ohio, in trying to make it possible for people to vote, they had early voting. But now, all of a sudden, in 2012, they only wanted early voting for members of the military. That law was overturned. And in Iowa, the Secretary of State of Iowa wanted to add some additional requirements for you to get, in order for you to register and vote. The citizens of Iowa turned that down. Then he came back and they hired someone and paid them almost $250,000 to see if they could find someone that tried to commit voter fraud through identity. Okay? Could not find one person. Then he wants to come back and ask the Iowa people, the citizens of Iowa, to allow him to do a last-minute purge just on his word alone. This is not right. This is not right. You know, and we thought 4 years ago, there was all this talk about a post-racial America. Folks, wake up. Yes, I'll be the first one to sit up here and say, we have come a long way. And most of us citizens here in the United States are good people who do look beyond racial demographics and stuff like that. But there's a large enough segment in the millions who still carry that racial bigotry. Okay? So I'm looking at this law here. You're saying 760,000 people to possibly 1.5 million. I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about that number. I mean, if the state says they don't believe the number is that large, well, shouldn't they try to do something? I mean, in this day of technology, shouldn't the state's programmers meet with the PennDOT programmers and get together and try to make that list as accurate as possible? And if the number is a lot smaller, to be able to present that number? This is nothing but organized chaos. And you know what? How many people, and the league can attest to this, that we've registered when people just go out to do grocery shopping because it's convenient. Now you put an additional burden on the people. Now you register, but now they got to go somewhere and get a photo ID. Now, what does that mean to us that are doing the registration? Does that mean that we're now going to have to follow up to see that they got the photo ID? You see what I'm saying? This is all designed to get not only the person that's trying to register frustrated, but to get you out there who are volunteering your time to do a civic thing to encourage people to register. It's going to get you frustrated because now they've added an additional layer of work that your organization has to do to follow through on the initial registration that you just signed. Now, we just did a voter registration drive last Saturday. It was called a Lunch on Us voter registration drive. People come, they gave them 2 hot dogs and sold a bag of chips. It was just something as an incentive. Yeah, we got about 12 to 15 people, but that's 12 to 15 people that are now registered that might not have been registered before. They changed their address and stuff like that. It's just sad. And what you have to pay attention to is 38 states out of the 50 states have introduced similar kinds of voting legislation. There's been more restrictive legislation, such as this here voter ID, but that's what's going on. And look, and let me show you how this is all coming together. This is a bigger thing than just Pennsylvania, folks. This is bigger. I mean, if you look at right after the 2008 presidential elections, in 2009, ACORN, a group that is known to register people, and they register low income and poor people. And most of those people tend to register with a particular party. ACORN was taken out of business because of some kind of a scam that was ran that they were later proved innocent, but the damage had been done. ACORN no longer exists. So the NAACP, the League of Women Voters, we had to fill that void that was once being filled by ACORN. Now, that's the first part of it. The second part of it was the Citizens United case. Now you got billionaires. A billionaire can actually keep a politician in an election, in a primary, because they got the money to do it. So that's taking the election away from us. You know, when you get $25 from this person, $25 from that person, you got 1 million people giving you, you're not beholden to any one person. But when a person is giving you $10 million, believe me, when that phone rings, you're going to pick it up. This is where we're going to. This is what's happening here. Now you're talking about the assault. Look at collective bargaining. How many of you think you have a shot with your employer if you can't come together? That's what this country was founded on. People coming together, banding together. If we have to stand up individually, do you think you stand a chance with your employer? No. These unions represent the middle class. Now, I'm a union member. I think the unions sometimes overreach. But the unions are responsible for the middle class. Okay? So you got all these different things coming together here, and there should be even greater outrage. There should be outrage throughout this country about what is happening here. I'm looking at, like I said, I work with Social Security. Maybe we should consider putting your picture on the Social Security card. Just they're free. Now, you wouldn't give a baby a picture, right? You'll wait till a person become 17, maybe 18, put their photo on the Social Security card, maybe every 5 years or 10 years. You allow them to update their card with a new photo, because people change over time. But Social Security cards are free. Voting should be free. I'm concerned if they're going to give out the initial voter ID card from PennDOT, if the initial ID is going to be free, are they going to have to pay to get it renewed? So now are you saying you got to pay to vote? So if you don't get your card renewed, you can't vote? This is what we're talking about. This is what we're dealing with. And yes, we in Luzerne County, we have met with Luzerne County Transit Authority. And we're doing the same thing with these seniors that are over 65 and disabled. Share Ride will take them to PennDOT, but you got the people. We're trying to get the list. We can't do anything. How do you know how to play? We got people calling us from out of state. I had a gentleman call from Schenectady, wanted to come and see how they could help us here. That's how bad it is. But we need to get this list so that we'll know what to work with. And if you listen to the testimony that they did last Thursday, and I was listening to the argument, they were saying PennDOT doesn't have the capacity to issue the required IDs. They admitted that. And the lawyer for the state said that if this number of 760,000 is true, he said, we got a problem. Well, don't you think we should try to find out exactly what the number is? Don't you think that should be at least a starting point? We're going around, we don't know what we're dealing with. We're saying for Luzerne County, possibly 18,000 people. Now, I also heard during the arguments, they said they sent letters out. Did they send letters out? They said, because some people call and say, well, why am I getting this letter? Well, if some people are calling, not everybody's going to call, because if somebody says, if you send them a letter, and they say, well, I got this, they just throw the letter away. So how do you update your information? How do you get as accurate information as possible? And in this day of technology, I think if you're going to pass a law and you're going to say that law doesn't impact so many people, then you should be able to substantiate that by presenting us with the exact count as best as possible. But that's where we are. We're going to continue doing what we're doing. I heard about the Supreme Court pushing it back down to the lower court and everything, but we're going to go ahead as if the law is being, that's what we got to do. We got to do. Now we got an additional thing, in addition to registering people, now we got to try to make sure they get the proper photo identification. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. That was terrific. I want to underscore a couple of points that Ron made. One is we had that conversation with Colts, and they looked at us and said, how many people do you think are going to need rides? And we said, well, you're the county government, you people should know how many people are going to need rides. We really don't have any sense of it. All we're saying is that we think there's an issue, especially in outlying areas that aren't serviced by a bus route, that people are going to have a difficult time getting to the photo center to get their ID. So that's certainly is an issue. And the other thing that I want to touch on briefly is something that Ron was the first one to bring up, and that's the burden on the nonprofit community. In Philadelphia, there's a terrific organization called the Committee of 70, and they have a lot of volunteers, and they have people who are willing to take folks out, to, drive them to the photo ID centers. And, it's a more, urban area, compact, maybe a little bit easier to get people around. Here in Lackawanna County, we've got a lot of people spread out throughout the county, and the volunteers, the people on the League of Women Voters, our local league, we all work. That's, so it's really hard to say, okay, we can take a couple of hours on a Saturday and do voter registration, but do we have the people, the volunteers, to actually say, I'm going to go and pick you up at your house and take you up to the photo ID center and get your picture? And it could take 3-4 hours to get all that done. And we just don't have the wherewithal to do it. So the burden on the nonprofit community is absolutely enormous, both in terms of manpower and whatever expenses, and Roberta Roberta talked about it, in terms of printing material as well. You know, as soon as you print something, it's out of sync with what the new law is. So it's certain there are more issues here that impact us in a variety of ways than just the idea of getting the voter ID. So with that, Keith is the Director of Advocacy for the Northeastern Pennsylvania Center for Independent Living. So Keith Williams, the microphone is yours.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. It's nice to be here tonight and part of this panel and to share some of our concerns about voter ID and related issues. And I want to touch on a few things having to do with some issues dealing with people with disabilities. And just bear with me. I just want to backtrack just briefly, kind of historically, some of the issues that people with disabilities have faced even prior to voter ID, both here in Lackawanna County, statewide, and nationally. And I have to say, we've worked closely over the year with Marion Medalis and the Voter Registration Bureau and her department and other folks, other employees within that department, and they've been wonderful in helping to work out more accessible systems and making sure that people with disabilities have the ability and the opportunity to vote in a number of ways. One of the ways, just tracing it through real quickly, it had been brought up before. One of the speakers had mentioned the old-fashioned booths. Well, as somebody with a lifelong physical disability and a wheelchair user, motorized wheelchair user, those booths were a problem for me. The curtains, the whole setup, but particularly the levers, reaching the levers, and even those that would be on the lowest row of levers would logistically be difficult for me to reach because of my relatively limited lack of dexterity and reaching ability. But that isn't just particular to me. That's also the case for a lot of people with different types of disabilities. You don't just have to be in a wheelchair. You can be ambulatory but still have arthritis. You can be elderly. You can have a number of different disabilities and still have problems reaching the levers. Times changed. We had the Help America Vote Act of 2002, something I know that Marion was very involved with. In fact, the County Voter Registration Bureau was involved in contacting a lot of the disability-related organizations in Lackawanna County and letting folks try different types of machines and different types of systems that they were considering getting and see which systems seemed to be more accessible, more usable by a variety of people with disabilities than others. And I'm just, hoping that other counties had gone through similar processes and given the actual consumers, people who were using the machines during each election, the opportunity to do so. So this happened in some areas of the state more so than others. We obviously had laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act that required that the voting process be accessible to people with disabilities on a state and local government level. And we've also had legislation that required that polling sites be architecturally accessible in all federal and all presidential elections. So, of course, in November, that's going to be a shining example of that particular requirement there. Overall, the laws stress that the process of voting be accessible rather than the facility, rather than the polling site be accessible for people with disabilities. But again, that changed with the presidential election. One of the things that we like to get the public to know, and when we work with legislators, and my organization, the Center for Independent Living, which advocates for people within a 10-county area, Northeast Pennsylvania. We network with a lot of other organizations statewide. We're nonpartisan as well, but we're involved in voter registration, getting people with disabilities registered, empowering them with the information they need to know where their polling sites are. We recommend that they check out in advance to make sure that they're accessible classic argument that applies to a polling site, or it could be a restaurant that you hear about where the buzz is good, and you call to find out if it's accessible. Oh, we're very accessible. Good news. We only have one step. Well, that one step might as well be a mountain, particularly if you have a motorized chair with batteries and equipment and so forth. But as with a lot of the other speakers who had mentioned here tonight, and the other people who are affected by the intent of voter ID and the regulations and the requirements in terms of jumping through all those administrative hoops, all the requirements of voter ID in Pennsylvania that the law is looking at, and we're obviously holding our breath like everybody else to see what happens down the road in the next week or so, seriously hinders opportunities for people with disabilities to be able to vote in a number of ways. For years, it's been our contention that aside from the issue of accessibility to polling sites, and aside from the issue of the machines, the technology, the processes of voting, people with disabilities have often been overlooked as a particular voting bloc to which legislators or candidates would address. And it's only been within the last several presidential elections that fortunately that's beginning to change. So it's slowly been coming around. But there are some problems in terms of voter ID. We talked about transportation. We're finding that it's particularly difficult in rural parts of the state. Bus routes, bus lines are very limited. Many areas of the state have what's called paratransit. Now, here in Lackawanna County, you've probably seen either the orange or the blue vans run by the Lackawanna County Coordinated System that really do quite a good job given the lack of resources in terms of funding and vehicles and so forth. But their resources are stretched. But we've been working with them, some disability organizations, to be able to get a combination of getting people to the polls and getting people upon request, if they're registered, to be able to get the proper kinds of ID. So that's kind of an ongoing process. In terms of getting the ID itself, people with disabilities represent a significant portion of Pennsylvania's population who don't always have ID for several different reasons. A lot of people with disabilities, based on his or her condition, don't drive. So as a result, don't have a driver's license. And I understand there's a non-driver's ID. That's what I have personally because I'm a non-driver. But not everybody has that. We've seen problems already locally, and we're getting anecdotal information statewide in terms of ID for people who acquire their disability later on in life. So let's say somebody who maybe, unfortunately, as a result of a automobile accident, now has a spinal cord injury, or somebody who might develop multiple sclerosis, and they're at the point where they're either in a wheelchair, possibly using crutches or cane, and who aren't driving. Well, as a result of that, they might have an expired driver's license, but because of that disability, they don't renew it, and just don't bother with the paperwork when it eventually comes in the mail to renew it because they're not driving anymore. If they don't have anything else, they're now invalid, ineligible in terms of not having that kind of ID. So that's an issue that we often see. We heard talk before a little bit earlier about assisted living facilities and some nursing homes, and that there's ID available in the forms and so forth. I think you had that before in your presentation, Roberta. A few issues that we've already have found with that. Some people, consumers, have had difficulties in completing and mailing the forms. As we all know and we've heard over the years, there's a shortage of staff at the facilities. There's a high turnover. One other thing separate from that we've only just just been hearing within the last, I'd say, 2 to 3 weeks, nothing locally, but in other parts of the state that's been filtering us. Apparently, some staff in some of the nursing homes and assisted living facilities who do have the forms, they're making the decision on who's competent to vote. Their own patients, their own residents, saying that if an employee of that home deems somebody as not having the capacity to be able to vote on their own or to select a candidate he or she wants, then they're not bothering. They're just tossing it or just not helping them or whatever. But whatever the case is, we know that there are a lot of people out there who are eligible, who are in these homes and institutions, and just who aren't doing it. One other thing, just kind of bouncing off the ID aspect itself, but voting issues for people with disabilities. Pennsylvania, as part of election law, if you have anybody with a disability in your family or involved with an agency or, maybe any students who are from the area here today, if you know someone who might have a disability and you're registered, but you do need assistance, you do need some actual physical assistance with the logistics once you arrive at the polling site, like maybe with signing in or maybe maneuvering through the line or getting to an area that you can do. You do have the right to request assistance from anyone that you choose other than the voter's employer or agent of the employer or officer or agent of the voters' union or a judge of election. Voter has a right to receive assistance at the voting booth or when voting by absentee ballot or alternative. 2 basic requirements for assistance. You need your voter registration card that notes that you may need assistance, or you must fill out and sign a form provided at the poll. Pennsylvania is one of the few states that, in terms of offering assistance for people with disabilities, they require that voters give the name and phone number of your physician. Personally, I think it's excessive, but for right now, it's in the law. So those are some of the issues that people with disabilities have faced historically, and the issues that, in fact, all of which we share our concerns with the speakers and with the issues that have been brought up tonight. So hopefully things will change in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. I want to follow up with one question to Marion on something that you brought up. And Marion, correct me if I'm wrong on this. I know Keith talked about the expired driver's licenses. Are they valid? Can you use it if it's expired within the last year? Is it still okay to use it? Is that right?
Yes, you can.
Okay, but longer than that, and I'm sure what Keith is talking about is certainly an issue for many people, that if it's longer than a year, and that's the only ID that you have, you will be turned away, or you'll have to vote on a provisional ballot at that point, so.
Well, you could go up to PennDOT, obviously, if you're able to, and if you do have an expired driver's license, as long as they're able to, I guess, what's the right word, prove that that's you, and it's in their database, you would be able to get the photo ID.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to our last, but certainly not least speaker, Mike Hanley is the Executive Director of United Neighborhood Centers, and they provide a significant amount of services and support for the people in our community. So Mike, the mic is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I know there's a number of familiar faces out here, but just to let folks know what United Neighborhood Centers is, we've been here in Lackawanna County really working with the low income and working poor of this community since 1923. We provide an array of programs and services. We have child care centers for working families. We have senior citizen centers for services and nutritional programs for seniors. We operate a number of housing programs for homeless families, for chronic homeless individuals, supportive housing programs. We work with kids aging out of foster care and supportive housing programs. And there's many other vast array of other programs that we provide. we trace our roots back to the settlement house movement, which was founded here in this country in the late 1800s. Probably the most famous one was Hull House in Chicago, founded by Jane Addams, who was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and many of you may know of her. And in our work and in the traditional work of settlement houses, civic engagement has been tremendously important. In our work, we work with residents of the housing developments, helping to build leadership and tenant councils within those developments, so that they can take control of their own lives and build self-sufficiency and bring programs and services into those developments. We have leadership training programs for our youth and teens in our community centers. And over the years, we also make an effort to inform and educate the folks that we work with on the decisions that are being made in Harrisburg and Washington and how they affect their lives, and encourage them to take an active part in that. So in that vein, this year, and probably largely as a result of the voter identification law, we made a concerted effort to really be an active part of this voting process this year. And so in late August, on a Friday afternoon, we basically closed our agency down, and Marion came to our agency, and with one of my other staff who used to work in Marion's office, trained all of our employees in voter registration and the regulations of the new identification law. So right now, in every one of our centers throughout Lackawanna County, we have staff that are trained and who are actively engaged in registering voters throughout this community. And we will be doing that right up through October the 9th. So I would welcome folks to spread that word. They can come into any one of our centers during regular business hours, and we will register. We operate apartment buildings for seniors and for families, and all of our staff in those apartments are registering tenants, as well as anyone in those neighborhoods that would like to be registered. The voter ID piece is a little more difficult. We are providing transportation from our senior centers for groups of seniors as they go up and need identification. And as we get groups of folks together, we'll be doing that as well. Today we had staff, and as a matter of fact, for the last few weeks, we've had staff going door to door in all the housing developments. We've partnered with, some of you may know Sister Ann Walsh from Friends of the Poor. We've partnered with Sister Ann, and we've been going door to door to every housing development in Scranton and Lackawanna County by the end of this period, registering voters and encourage them and educating them on voter identification. Just to give you a sense of the barriers, and Keith really spoke to them on behalf of the disabled community. When I think about this, I think about a young woman who was a working mother, who comes to one of we provide care for her children in one of our child care centers. She gets up in the morning about 5 o'clock every morning to get her children ready. It takes 2 buses to get to our child care center, and drops the children off, and then walks to work to get to work by 7 o'clock in the morning. At the end of the day, she walks back to our center, picks up her children, takes 2 buses to get back home. Then it's homework help, it's making lunches or making dinner for that day, and all the other things that is involved in keeping a household. She's a young woman who has voted in the past. She does not have ID. She does not have a driver's license. She doesn't have the money to buy a car, so she's never driven. So this woman is going to have to take the time out of her day, and the resilience of her. I admire her tremendously for the resilience of getting up every day and taking care of her children and getting to work every day and doing everything that's right in this community to be a part of this community. But the burden for her to get to PennDOT in Dunmore is just tremendous. And she is just one woman and one family through this community that is not going to be able to vote this year if she cannot get that identification. And it's a tremendous burden for her. And I speak also about the seniors that we deal with in our senior centers. You know, when Sara talks about the 99-year-old woman that she took up, you know, we're able to take the seniors who are part of our senior center. The elderly folks who take part in senior centers are a minority in this community. There are many, many, many who are living in isolation, who don't have families, depend on friends or neighbors to take them to the store to get their groceries. They're embarrassed to ask these folks who are giving of their time to help them on a daily basis, to take the hours it takes to drive up to PennDOT and wait and get a voter ID. And these are people who have voted for generations in elections. These are folks who are veterans. These are folks who have never missed an election, and they're really struggling. And so trying to reach out to them and get them out there is tremendously important. And, you know, I'm not a historian, but as I was driving over here today, I was thinking that, you know, since the birth of this country, at that time it was only, I believe, landowners that could vote. That was since over the years, that was expanded. Then there was the woman's right to vote in the early part of the century. Then there was a struggle in the 1960s for providing the vote for all people in this community. I'm not sure in the history of our country that there's been this concerted effort to really pull back the right to vote. And I think that's something that we really need to realize. I mean, this is, you know, as Ron said, this is not just Pennsylvania. This is all across this country, a movement to really take away from the people of this country the right to vote, which is the very essence of this democracy. So it's very frightening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We've heard from a variety of speakers now, and before we take questions from the audience, I just want to give the speakers an opportunity to follow up on something, and I see Mike has his hand up.
Can I just add
Sure,
one
absolutely.
thing? Yes. And on Tuesday is National Voter Registration Day, and it's going to be celebrated all across this country. And at our West Side Center at 1004 Jackson Street, we're going to have a voter celebration. So we encourage the community to come out between 5 and 7 at our West Side Center at 1004 Jackson Street. I have flyers here that I'll leave. I guess is there a table out front? So I'll leave it out on the table and encourage folks to come out. And we will have folks there to register people as well. But even if you're registered, just come out and celebrate the right that we have in this democracy to vote. So we encourage people to come along. And we'll have hot dogs and
All
How about
American.
chips? Are you
I
giving
don't know
chips?
if we'll have chips. We'll get chips. We'll get chips. Got to keep up with Ron down here. We'll get chips.
Thank you, Mike. That's terrific. So as I said, we heard from a lot of people, and, you know, as speakers, we don't even know everybody that's here, and certainly, you know, didn't know what each person was going to say. So I just want to give the speakers a round and an opportunity to add on or to clarify something or to follow up. So Sara, we'll start with you. Is there anything else that you'd want to add before we take questions from the audience?
Yeah, this isn't about voter ID, but it is about general voting rights, which is to remind people in Pennsylvania that even if you have a criminal record, that you still have the right to vote in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of misconceptions out there because a lot of other states don't let people with criminal convictions vote, but Pennsylvania, you do have that right. And we do have a card in the back explaining what the rules are for that. So I just want to make sure people knew that.
Thank you. Marion, anything that you'd like to add?
Yes. In Lackawanna County, we have a department that's called with Community Outreach Coordinators, and these coordinators have been visiting different senior centers. They go to council meetings and school board meetings and supervisors meetings. So they are also educating the public with regard to the voter ID law. I do know the Department of State is in the process of mailing out a notice to every registered household where at least there's one registered voter advising them of the new voter ID law. And those notices are supposed to be going out very shortly.
Actually, mine came to my house today.
Okay.
Thank you. Roberta, anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, I would like to add to what Keith said. If you go to the Vote Spa the Vote Spa website, you will see they have lots of forms. I've been doing some workshops with voters who are blind, and they need assistance from people to help them even get the absentee ballots and then complete them. So all the forms you need to get the assistance you need are in the Resource Center of the Vote Spa website. That's Vote PA website, okay?
Actually, votes,
PA.
VOTES,
PA.com.
Okay, thank you. Ron, how about you? Anything to add?
Yeah, I have basically a question that I would just like to ask Marion. I had received some voter registration forms. They had done some voter registration out at Bloomsburg University. Would the Luzerne County Bureau of Elections, would they be able to process those, or do I have to send them to the county that they're in.
No. Our department, if we'll get registrations in for various counties, what we do is we just forward them on. So
Okay.
they should mail them, obviously, for you too.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Keith, how about you? Anything to add?
No, that was a good point that you just raised before about the website. Votes PA has some good disability-oriented website on their information about absentee ballots, provisional ballots, alternative ballots. Yeah, some other good information in terms of people with disabilities. Also, if you have a chance to check out a website, and it also has a page on Facebook, our organization belongs to the Pennsylvania Disability Voters Coalition, which is a group of organizations, and one of which is the Philadelphia office of the Disability Rights Network that received a grant, some federal funds, to coordinate efforts for people with disabilities statewide. Good organization, worth checking out.
Terrific. Mike, anything else?
No, thank you.
All right. So with that, we'll open the floor up for questions from the audience. Jean has a microphone, and I'm going to ask that you actually wait to get the microphone so that we can pick your question up for the television, for the broadcast. So,
is there any other place that physically issues an ID appropriate for voting than PennDOT?
Marion, I think that question's for you.
In terms of the Pennsylvania photo ID, I mean, you would have to go to PennDOT, not unless, say, you're an employee of a particular, say, the university or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, federal government. Other than that,
Or nursing home.
Or nursing home. So if you're if you're a member of the general public, not someone who works for a governmental entity,
right.
or someone who works for a school district, because we already said that's not allowable
Right.
by the Pennsylvania state. So if you're just a member of the general population, you're not in a nursing home, the only way you can get a photo ID, an acceptable photo ID, is to go to a PennDOT center.
That's
So if
correct.
I'm in
passport.
Lackawanna County and I work the second shift from 3 to 11, there's no way I can go get an ID.
Marion, I don't know what the hours are, but I'm going to say that's right. I mean, well, if they have hours in the morning, yeah.
I did say earlier, the only time you could go up, this is in Lackawanna County, up PennDOT, is Wednesday from 12 to 7:45, and then Friday and Saturday from 8:30 to 4:15.
I work 2 to 10 or 1 to 9, it's out the window.
You got to use the microphone, yeah.
I'm done. If I work 2 to 10 or 1 to 9, or I've got 2
You're-
jobs, I cannot get an ID, even if I have all those complicated pieces of paper I have to have.
You're absolutely correct. That's a good point, a valid point. Anybody else? Questions? Bev? Wait for the microphone.
How do you determine, what's the expiration date for somebody in a nursing home?
The
Good point.
expiration date is whatever they choose to put on the bottom of the form. I have a wonderful story. I have a friend who's the director of special education. In the last election, she brought a picture. She's retired, and she brought a picture of a young woman with a bikini on, and she said, "This is my photo ID." And the person at the polling place said, "Obviously, it has expired."
That's a good point. It's really up to the entity that is issuing the ID what the expiration date is, and that includes for the University of Scranton. I don't know what they've agreed to put on. Jean, do you know what they've agreed to put on it?
They debated, and I think they went with they debated, and I think they went with an expiration, assuming 4 years.
Okay.
But they thought to just do it for a year, hoping that the law would be gone by then.
So it could be, up to the institution. We could put a 6-month expiration on, or a 10-year expiration. There are no rules around that, including for nursing homes. So you could come in and have an expiration date of, the year 3000, and it would still be valid. So next.
I was at a doctor's appointment the other day. Is this working? And they took my picture as a prerequisite to providing medical service. And I don't understand why we couldn't have people's picture taken when they're signing to vote as a result. And it's more of a suggestion than if somebody's so obsessed with photo ID, then why don't we just have a situation where they're ID'd right at the voting polls, and basically who wants to serve 5 years in prison to cast an illegal ballot?
Right. I should say that we've, as advocates, have asked multiple times for mobile units for PennDOT, a variety of things, and they have turned us down. They do not, haven't really extended hours for PennDOT locations in Philadelphia. They finally added Thursday evenings, and that's it.
Mr. Tarzai admitted the intent. We all know it.
Next question?
The gentleman before me took a lot of my question, but I just went to the doctor today, and I had to produce a photo ID. I mean, depending on how old you are, you have to produce a photo ID to buy cigarettes, alcoholic beverages, and so forth. I mean, I have mixed feelings about the whole law, but I do think that it was unconscionable of the state to introduce it in a presidential election year. And then, following along the same lines as the fellow here, why can't you have like outreach programs with the same sort of machine that you're using in the nursing homes to produce the photo ID? I mean, most of these polling places are public buildings or schools or churches or whatever, and they'll say, well, Thursday afternoon from noon until 4, they will be here to give you a photo ID. If the voters can make it to the polling place to vote, they should be able to make it there to get their photo ID. I mean, whatever that machine is that they use at the nursing homes, maybe there should be more of them, and it should be more readily available.
I would tell you to contact your state representative, your state senator, and the governor's office, because the law has been passed, and that's what we have to live with. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but the issue really is that you have to work with the legislators for that. Ron?
Yeah, my response to that question is it is not intended to be a convenience. That's the whole purpose of it, to make it difficult, to discourage. It's not intended. If they wanted to make it convenient, it would be no issue. Thank you.
That's true. Question?
I understand that they are taking people up to vote from the United Neighborhood Center on Friday. But how are the people supposed to get there to get a ride? Do they pick up at home or?
Well, we'll be working in our senior centers, and our senior centers, they're generally in the neighborhood. They come in either that, or sometimes they have coordinated transportation through the county to get to the senior centers. So we'll be providing transportation from the centers.
But some the seniors I know can't get to the senior centers, and I take them up too. But I'm just saying, if you have it on Friday, is there any way they can call and they be picked up or what?
Well, that's a possibility. I mean, certainly give me a call, Charlotte, and we'll see, see what we might be able to do. One of our problems, and I think somebody talked about this here, is capacity, and how we just don't have the staff or the ability to take people up one at a time. And that's why in our senior centers, we can take a number up at the same time, and it's just easier for us to be able to do that. Doing it one at a time is more difficult. But let me know, and we'll see if we can do that. Yeah. Okay. We will also, let me just add that on Election Day, we'll also be providing rides to the polls. So anyone who registers through our agency over the course of the last few weeks or the next few weeks, we will be calling on Election Day, reminding them, and also providing transportation to the polls. So.
I want to just make one point that's a follow-up to all of that. Transportation is certainly one of the issues, and especially with the elderly. But the other issue is the fear of not knowing what to do, looking foolish or feeling that you're going to look foolish. I help my elderly relatives all the time, and I know for some of them, they would not go, even if Mike gave them a ride, unless someone was standing there holding their hand and saying, go over there to that line, here, sign here, this is where you have to sign. It's not that they're not competent to vote, certainly competent to vote, but still there's a personal fear of something that they're not used to doing, being in a strange place, being in the wrong line, which has happened, that you're in one line in Lackawanna County, there's 2 different lines. If you get in the wrong line, you're waiting for a while. So I think it goes deeper even than the transportation issue. And Ron spoke to it. It's not meant to be easy. So Sarah, you have a comment?
Yeah, and that reminds me, I just wanted to add that in Philadelphia, the League of Women Voters were trying to organize an advocate program where people would be in PennDOT to help anyone who comes in needs help with voter ID. And I have to say that PennDOT is not allowing them to be inside. And I do know of one of our attorneys who went to assist a voter in Pittsburgh, and she was kicked out of PennDOT. So, and every time I've been to PennDOT, I've taken 3 voters to PennDOT. I've been asked who I was when I was with them every time. So,
Their niece. Jean, is there a question here?
I was just wondering if anybody has any documentation or statistics as far as how many documented cases of voter fraud there were in Pennsylvania last year. If there's a database.
Oh, that's 0. That's an easy one. The state admitted that.
Okay. So there's no.
Yeah.
They say you have a greater chance of being struck by lightning than for someone to commit voter fraud in sense of identity.
Question over here.
I had a question for Marion. I have a few residents that moved up from Philadelphia, Berwyn area, and they're not registered to vote. It is not too late to register them in Lackawanna County?
October the 9th is the last day to register for the upcoming election.
And
have to have lived here 30 days.
But when did they move now? Just
no, I'm going to say about 3-4 months. So they're here
Well,
longer
they're
than
fine,
30 days.
yeah.
And then I had one question for Keith. You said voter assistance?
Yes.
I usually take a few residents. Am I allowed to still assist with them, or does someone there have to assist them?
According to this, because I've had assistance before, and someone who isn't an employee or involved with the system, may be given assistance by anyone they choose, other than the judge of elections, officer or agent of the voters' union, the voter's employer or agent of that employer. Yeah, so anybody other than those individuals. So yeah, you would be able to assist somebody even if they weren't related, if they're a friend, a colleague, just somebody you know who needs assistance. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Over here? Jean, you should have worn your roller skates tonight.
Thanks. I was just wondering if has there been any alternative that's been proposed by anyone that has been rejected that seems to incorporate this specious argument that they have that voter fraud is out there that would still allow people to have access to unfettered access to vote? In other words, has there some compromise position out there that would have been acceptable from your end of things that would have also incorporated the other side's views that somehow voter fraud has been a problem?
Go ahead.
Okay. There are a number of things. I mean, on its face, photo ID all by itself is not unconstitutional. It's the fact that a lot of people have obstacles to getting it. Some other states, if you can't get it, what you do, you vote and you sign an affidavit saying you don't have ID and you are the person you say you are. So that's kind of the last resort, but you have that option. That's not an option here because you vote provisionally in Pennsylvania, you still have to go prove your ID. Within 6 days. So that's one thing. The other thing is the short amount of time there's just no way that this could be implemented in a way that will work in this short amount of time. Other states that have done it have taken several election cycles to do that as well. The other thing is there's a very narrow list of IDs that are acceptable for this. As you mentioned, the Department of Veterans Affairs ID doesn't count, which is just kind of sends such a horrible message. And adding expiration dates to things like nursing homes IDs, those they don't have them and they shouldn't be required. So there's other forms of ID. Someone mentioned, people get asked for ID for a variety of things. That's true. And our clients had different kinds of ID, photo ID included, but those are not acceptable under the law. So I think broadening the list of things that are acceptable ID would also be helpful.
And Sara, I think you make a good point, and that is about the fact that with how quickly it has to be implemented. So, we had it was It was the trial run, if you will, during our primary election. Well, a lot of people don't vote in primary elections. So there are a lot of people who, if they're not plugged in, not reading their mail, whatever it is, haven't heard of this. And this is the first time they're going to the polls to vote in a presidential election year without the proper ID and no way to get it. If there were at least several cycles before implementation, I think I personally would find it less distasteful than I find it right now. It's the lack of time and the lack of knowledge of how many people are actually impacted by this. Ron, you had
Yeah, Sarah, with the affidavit, will that be counted at the time, or is there a follow-up to that?
Yes, because they have the 6 days. So that's the other problem. Whatever you can do if you try to avoid voting provisionally, because those are often not counted. I mean, you can answer that better than I could, but we definitely discourage people from having to do that.
And there's a question in the back of the room.
I noticed that none of the advocates of this law are at this forum, nor have I seen the advocates for this law at any forum or even at a non-forum. There seems to be a lack of pride in what they've done. We're not talking about a fringe group. We're talking about a majority of the state legislature and the governor of the Commonwealth. Can any of the panelists give us any idea? Have you talked to any of them? Could you tell us about the pride that they have in what they've done?
Good question. Anyone, Roberta or Sara, you want to take that?
On television? No.
I was just going to mention that I believe there will be legislation put on into the Harrisburg in the next 2 weeks that will call for the repeal of the voter ID law. I don't know if it'll go anyplace, but there is legislation planned to be put onto the table.
Thank you. Abby, I think you had a question.
I just wanted to say that one of the other provisions that's in other states' voter ID laws that isn't in ours is if a poll worker recognizes the voter, they can vote. And certainly for a good number of the plaintiffs in the case, some of whom had been voting since they were able to vote for Franklin Roosevelt, they would have been recognized by people in the polling place. That would have been one of the simplest modifications of this law to make it far more palatable, and that, of course, was not acceptable either.
Thank you. Father, I think you had a question in the back.
For Sarah, as far as the court system goes, like, when will this be the last step where you'll know whether or not it's going to work or not? And what's your feeling about it? I mean, as far as taking politics out of it, really, what's going to happen?
Well, I certainly didn't expect it to be, at the end of last Thursday, I thought, well, at least we'll have an answer either way, and I'll know whether I need to keep going out and doing all these presentations. But they foiled me. So as I said, October 2nd, the judge has to rule. The losing side can appeal that. The state Supreme Court, it depends on whether they want oral argument again or not. They're scheduled to have a week of oral argument the week of October 15th. And then it takes a few days possibly for a decision. Now, they may just have briefing. If there's an appeal, they may just have ask for briefs and then be able to rule right then without needing another oral argument. So it's really hard to say. I'd say the latest we would know is probably October 20th, that kind of date, which is, this is one concern we have is the poll workers training. This is crazy. And the longer this goes on, the more likely, even if it's overturned or there's an injunction for this November, there's going to be a lot of misinformation with poll workers. When the trial, someone from Philadelphia testified that their poll worker training is not mandatory and only 20% of their poll workers attend. So if they're getting they're behind on their news, they don't know what the ID law is, it's just going to be a big mess either way at this point.
And let me just add that I think that not only the poll workers are going to be confused, but the people are going to be confused.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And they're not going to come to the polls if they feel that they don't have the right ID. So,
absolutely, that is a concern about it's going to suppress people turnout in general.
Okay. I'd just like to also make a mention that the purpose, when I went to that medical exam, of them taking my picture, I had a photo ID. But a lot of people that go into that clinic are disabled and they may not be driving, they may be shipped in wheelchairs or whatever, and the purpose is that they can collect the insurance money and assure the insurance company that they have seen this patient so that there's no fraud in the medical, either Medicare, Medicaid, or Blue Cross or whatever other private insurer is not being defrauded. So that was the purpose of taking the picture.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the panel this evening? There's a couple over here.
I'm going to ask one and then I'll move over there.
Okay.
I'm just curious if anybody on the panel can tell, what can people who see the chaos of Pennsylvania's new voter ID law creating, what can they do to get the law repealed if the state courts sustain the voter fraud created by the law?
Anybody want to take that? Roberta?
You can Google Pennsylvania legislature. You can put in your name and you can put in your address and your zip code. You will find your state legislators. Please call them, email them, call them, email them. I think a handwritten letter is always the best. Telephone and handwritten letters to your legislator. The governor's name and contact numbers are also available. I think until we make the noise, little will happen.
I think that Roberta makes a really valid point, and from a League of Women Voters perspective, and we've worked both on behalf of our own organization and with other partner organizations on a variety of legislative issues over the years. I have actually sat in meetings with legislators and been told, well, nobody's really interested in this because my office isn't hearing anything about it. So if you think that your phone call, the phone call from your neighbor doesn't mean anything, you're wrong. It does mean something. And in some instances, the legislator says, I got a lot of calls. I got 20 calls on this. So it really can make a big impact. That's a really important point to make. Jean, over here.
All right, for students at the university, is the university ID an acceptable ID if it has printed on it class of 2014, or do we need a sticker? Because we were told by
No, you need to get a sticker because that class of 2014 is not an expiration date.
I think there's been some misunderstanding on that, and so maybe someone else can clarify. I've been told that one of the candidates, presidential candidates' campaigns, is telling students as long as there is a graduation date on your ID, you're good to go. My understanding is you are not. You need an expiration date, and that's why the university agreed to add an expiration date to their employee and student IDs. Can anybody clarify what is going to be acceptable?
I don't know about the graduation year. I do know that the state has said something like spring 2013 is acceptable as an expiration date, so a semester label would be acceptable, but I don't know about the graduating class.
May I just add to the fact about the expiration date is it's only for accredited colleges and universities, community colleges. If you're going to a technical school or other institution of higher learning that's not accredited or seen to be valid, like maybe going to hairdresser school or massage school or culinary institutes, those IDs will not count.
And there is a list of the accredited institutions, and Dan, it's on our website, right, the survey. So if you go to lwvlackawanna.org, if you're not sure, we did place the survey of accredited institutions. So Ron, you had something to add?
Yes, I'd like to ask the young man, you're a student here? Has the university reached out to you to say that you need this? Okay, good. That's what I want to hear. And I'm wondering how many. I think they were saying about, 80% of the universities and stuff did not have the proper ID. So I wonder if the other universities are doing what the University of Scranton is doing.
And I do know that after we started asking questions here at the University of Scranton, our registrar and general counsel talked to folks at other institutions to see what they were doing. So there have been some conversations in some higher ed institutions. I would play it safe if I were a student. I would get the expiration sticker. Yep. I know it sounds silly that a sticker can make a difference, but that is what we are being told, one interpretation of the law. So I would take the time to get the sticker and not count on the graduation date.
Marion, since the poll workers that you train are going to have to make the decisions on that, what would you say if the ID card said class of 2014? Is that a legitimate expiration date?
I'm sure we're going to get a lot of calls on Election Day, and obviously we have our solicitor will be on hand, and the judge of the common pleas courts are always there. So, you know, if we're not sure ourselves, obviously we'll have them make a decision.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Additional questions right here? Okay.
I thought this was a little bit beyond the scope of tonight's discussion, but a couple people brought up about how big this problem is of people that are not truly registered to vote voting. And the panel has thrown out numbers from 90,000 to 1.5 million people who are registered to vote but will no longer be able to vote because they can't produce a photo ID. I guess those numbers were generated from comparing the database of PennDOT's driver license records with registered voters. Now, there's also databases about people who are dead, the Social Security Death Index. Has anybody taken the time to make a study on that, comparing registered voters with those who are no longer with us? Also, I think another possible source of people who are voting who are not truly registered in the district in which they're voting is people who have moved, either from one state to another, people who maintain two residences, one here and one in Florida or whatever. I mean, if this is a problem, let's take a look at it. I mean, if you can generate these numbers here about people who are going to be not able to vote because they don't have a driver's license, we should be able to come up with a number about this. As far as people being prosecuted for it, and maybe I'm the only one, but has anybody in this room today not broken a speeding license, speed limit law today? I mean, just because you're not convicted doesn't mean you don't commit the crime. Thank you.
Marion, since you have processes in place for dealing with deceased voters, so do you want to address that issue in particular?
We receive information through the Department of State, and they get it through the Department of Health with voters that have passed away. But the only problem with that is the information. They're always like 3 months behind us. So what I do is I actually bring in the paper every day and go through the obituaries, and if I'm able to match a person that has passed away against our records, we do cancel the voter out.
How about the issue of someone who's moved? Is that something, how do you handle that?
Well, again, there are certain requirements that are in place with our records that we're required to do, send notices to voters. And we have 2 maintenance programs that we do. One is done in January and one is done in like the late summer. So we're up to date as far as we can be. But sometimes the voters themselves need to update their records also.
Thank you. Question here.
It's not a question, it's just a comment. In the testimony taken, because I listened to the hearings, one of the justices on the Supreme Court held up his ID, said this is signed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania, and it's not an acceptable ID.
Any other questions? Dan.
I have the benefit of being a poll worker in Lackawanna County. So I hear the gentleman here what you're talking about, and is fraud happening? We should have evidence. And I heard the speeding ticket reference before, but we have evidence that it's there. However, if folk are really worried about how to protect and make sure there's no fraud, I really advocate to have poll workers watch what I'm doing on Election Day. Because ultimately, if there's something going on, a Republican and Democrat poll worker are making sure the board is doing what they're supposed to. Because I would suppose that if fraud is actually going to happen, it's being enabled by poll workers who are in collusion. Again, prove that, though. But I'm saying there's other ways to rig an election. This is probably the least likely scenario. Again, I'm talking as a judge of election. If I wanted to do something, no one's in the polling place, knock, 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 the lever or whatever it is, and I'll sign in on the book if there's no one watching, is a way to do it. Just told everyone how to.
Thank you, Dan.
So by all means, please, R's, D's, watch and make sure I'm being honest and my board is being honest. That's the whole point of poll watchers. So, and if there's something going on, then that's where evidence will present itself, and then we can have a fact-based discussion as opposed to, well, I think this is going on, we have illegals voting, all this other weird stuff that is not factual. If we prove something, let's fix it and really have how it's being done is what I'm advocating. And again, as a poll worker, I want to make sure an accurate election's happening, a fair election, and there's no fraud in my place. Keep me honest.
I think there's a question right behind you.
This is a little off topic, but I think someone mentioned that it's 38 out of 50 states that are having these registration commitments. Okay, well, my question is there a certain voting trend with those 38 states versus those 12 states? Like, why didn't those 12 states have that problem that we do?
Anybody on the panel want to respond to that?
The states that, the 12 states, well, a lot of the states, what they've looked at, there's this group called ALEC. And what they've done is they've crafted these voter ID laws. I think the first voter ID law was passed in Indiana. So they use that as a template. And anyone who's a member of ALEC was given this template to take back to their home state. And that's what happened in the case of Pennsylvania. Our Mike, what's his name? Terzai. He was a member of that group, ALEC. And that's where this voter ID law came from. And so these state legislatures are taking it back. And what they've done, and let's be honest, I mean, with the NAACP, we're nonpartisan, but sometimes with what is going on, when you speak out against it, and you see that it's attacking your group, you may sound very partisan. They're talking about the elimination of Sunday voting. Well, that is what a lot of the minority churches in the South use as a means to get people to participate in the political process. So all of a sudden now you cut out Sunday voting. Well, we know exactly what it is you're doing. So there was what they've done. This is not done in a vacuum. They've looked at the states that President Obama won in 2008, and those are the states that they're targeting with this more aggressive form of voter ID. But like I said, there's 38 states out of 50 that had offered some kind of regulation. The more restrictive forms. I guess they cut me off already, huh?
Oh. Not intentionally. Our system went to sleep. There we go. We're back.
The more restrictive forms is this here voter ID, such as the one here in Pennsylvania. Matter of fact, here in the state of Pennsylvania, they have floated the idea of actually changing the way the state awards its delegates. They were talking about going from a winner-take-all to giving delegates, I guess, by the district that you won. So in essence, where Pennsylvania now has 20 delegates in a winner-take-all, the candidate who wins the state of Pennsylvania, had they went through with this other plan, could end up with a net of two delegates. So that's a big change, to change something. It's like changing the rules of the game, like in the last quarter of the game. Basically, that's what's happening.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Anybody? No? Well, with that, I want to thank our distinguished panel. How about a round of applause? If you appreciate this type of event and the work that the League of Women Voters does, I invite you to two things. Join the League of Women Voters. We have membership forms out in the lobby. And also, if you so care to, make a financial contribution. Dan, and I'm not sure who else will be standing at the door with a basket, so feel free. Anything you can contribute helps us cover the cost for these types of events. Thank you. Don't forget to vote on November 6th. Don't forget to register to vote before October 9th. And we hope to see you all out at the polls. Thank you.
And thank you, interpreters.